Hey, it's Rick. Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'll show you how I designed, printed, and cast these epoxy dip pen holders. The first step is modeling. I'm not going to get into that in too much detail in this video. It's a very simple shape. The only important thing to note is that the hole in the end is the correct size, which is about 6.2 millimeters in diameter. I printed this out on my Anycubic Photon Mono X in Soraya Tech Build resin. Then I sanded the whole thing to remove layer lines. Starting with a 240 grit and working up to 4000, I had to get creative sanding the inner hole. I wrapped some sandpaper around a drill bit for this part. This is what the finish looks like at this stage. It's very smooth, but I want it shiny, so the next step is to buff it with this product. It's called Meguiar's Ultimate Compound. It's an automotive polish. I just put a little bit on some paper towel and I buff it for a few minutes. This is the final result after that. It's pretty shiny. I could get it shinier with a higher grit of polish, but this is good for my purposes. I actually made 3 of these in different diameters. One was too skinny, one was too fat, but this one was just right. I created this little vent piece for the mold with styrene rods which are available at hobby shops. I superglued one inside the other and sharpened the tip with an X-Acto knife. I like to set it up with this pair of weighted tweezers I have to hold it in place while the glue dries. Once that's done, I plug the top hole with a drill bit and build up around it with plasticine. Now I can wax this 3D printed mold case in place with a wax tool and some sprue wax. I know some people prefer hot glue, but for me, this has never leaked. Once that's done, I can use this stand I built to hold it in place while I pour the first round of silicone. I'm using the stand because I don't want the model touching the sides of the mold or the bottom. The next day when the silicone is set up, I don't need the stand anymore. I printed a shorter length of mold case and I attached it with some more wax. All of these steps are necessary to make it possible to access the mold as I go. I can now pour the next layer of silicone up to the top of the orange plasticine. The next day after that hardens, I can pull out the drill bit and remove the plasticine. The cavity left from the plasticine will give me a clear separation where the two halves meet, and this will give me pretty clean parting line with minimal cleanup. I cut the registration key so that the top will always go back in the same orientation. Then I glue on another sharpened styrene rod for the vent. Once the glue is dried, I can paint on a Vaseline mold release to keep the two pieces of silicone from sticking to each other. Then I spray the top of the whole thing with more mold release just to be sure. I find the Vaseline works better when it's silicone on silicone, but it can also leave paint strokes which will show up in the casting, so I never use it directly on the part. Here I've just cut a hole in a piece of paper to keep the overspray to a minimum. Now I can add another bit of mold case and wax that in place. And then I can do my final silicone pour. Once everything sets, I can remove the mold from the base and split the whole thing with a Dremel tool. Now I pull the mold apart to see what I've got. That long skinny piece is hard to get out since there's no draft in the hole. I'll have to apply extra mold release when casting to make sure that it doesn't break off. I cut a slit in the bottom to access the fill sprue. Then it's a matter of removing the original part. It was a little bit of work, but I got it eventually. Then I cut a reservoir in the top of the mold. This is to hold extra resin so that when it shrinks during curing, it has a supply to pull resin from, so there won't be any voids in the casting. This is the final mold design. I printed a wider base so it won't fall over in the pressure pot. I also glued little hooks in the sides to help hold the top down. I pry the mold case apart with a screwdriver bit to make it easy to slide the mold in. Then I stand it up and strap the top down with elastics. If you don't have pressure between the two parts, resin will ooze out from the seam. Time to mix some resin. I determined I needed about 15 milliliters to fill the mold, and this one has some blue acrylic ink and some blue glitter. It's going to be mostly transparent. I load up my syringe and inject it into the bottom port of the mold. By applying slow, gentle pressure, it fills, pushing the air out the vent at the top. Then I can put it in its base and into the pressure pot at 60 psi for 24 hours. Now that it's cured, I can take it out. I pull out the plug at the top with pliers. I use the same trick with a screwdriver bit to pry the case open and remove the mold. I pull out the fill plug at the bottom and insert the end of an air gun to force the part out. This is done at around 90 psi. The part actually flew across the room and I had to go find it, but it wasn't damaged. It came out really great with no cleanup necessary. The funny lighter bit on the end is from the inside hole not being polished as much as the outside. It reacts with light differently than the rest. If you wanted to eliminate that, you'd have to find a way to polish the inside of it. Now I know you can get pen holders pretty cheap, but the problem is the plastic they're made of. I really like using acetone to clean my pens. I find it prevents rust on the nibs, but it's destroyed every pen I've ever bought. And while epoxy isn't acetone proof, it is very resistant. So for quick cleanings, it seems to have no effect on the finish of the pen. I've also made these in solid colors. You can see the tiny fill blemish on the end, which could be cut off. All you need to do is add a metal insert to your nibs. I got this bag of 10 on Etsy pretty cheap, but I imagine you could find them Amazon, eBay, wherever. Well, that's it for this one. I hope you got something useful out of it. Don't forget to hit all the buttons on your way out, and thanks for watching.